having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.
Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Okay, let's unpack this. The world of aviation, usually, a picture of routine safety, was really jolted on Thursday, June 12, 2025. A truly terrible event. Air India flight AI-171 crashed just moments after takeoff in Ahmedabad, India. And this wasn't just another accident. It was a tragedy on a massive scale.
Yeah.
And it involved an aircraft model, the Boeing 797 Dreamliner, that's widely seen as one of the safest flying. The sources you shared paint a devastating picture, the loss, the response, and this urgent hunt for answers. How could this happen?
It's fascinating and just deeply tragic how fast it all unfolded. And like you said, unprecedented for this specific aircraft type. So our mission today is really to go through the information you've given us, pull out the crucial facts, and try to understand the timeline, the human impact, and the really complex puzzle facing investigators right now.
Absolutely. We're doing a deep dive into your source material here to get the clearest possible picture of Flight AI-171. So let's start with the basics. The event itself. What did the sources tell us about the flight, the plane, the crash location?
Okay, so the aircraft was an Air India Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, registration VT-A&B. It wasn't brand new, about 11 years old.
Right.
The date, again, Thursday, June 12th, 2025. It was a London Gatwick-bound flight, had just taken off from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport in Ahmedabad, runway 23, and it crashed straight into the BJ Medical College hostel block. That's in the Meghani Nagar area of the city.
And the human cost.
Yeah.
You mentioned it's immense.
It's just grim. The numbers are central to all the reports. We're talking 241 people on board. That's 230 passengers, 12 crew, none survived.
Okay.
And then added to that, at least 38 fatalities on the ground where the plane hit the building.
So that brings the total.
At least 279 people. It's being called one of the deadliest aviation disasters in, recent memory. And critically, the sources all confirm this is the first fatal hull loss of a Boeing 787 since it entered service.
That fact alone is shocking. A 787 crashing. But those numbers, just heartbreaking. Let's focus on those critical moments right after the plane left the ground. What does the timeline look like, according to the sources?
Okay, takeoff was at 1:38 p.m. India Standard Time. That's 08:08 UTC. Reports said the weather was stable, clear visibility. So it doesn't seem like initial conditions were a factor.
But the trouble started almost immediately. Very low altitude.
That's right. The sources point to problems starting around just 625 feet above the ground. That's barely seconds after leaving the runway.
Wow. And this is when the pilots made that urgent call.
Yes, the Mayday call. The pilots were Captain Sumit Saparwal, 55 years old, very experienced, over 8,200 hours, and First Officer Clive Kunder, 32, with about 1,100 hours. They reported a critical loss of power and thrust.
What'd they actually say?
The sources quote parts of their call, desperate phrases like no thrust and unable to lift.
Unable to lift at 625 feet. I mean, this just tells you the severity instantly. And the tracking signal, the transponder, that was lost almost right after, even lower.
Exactly. Signal lost within a minute of takeoff, around 230 feet. And this lines up with what eyewitnesses and some video footage showed the plane struggling for height, landing gear still down, then a rapid descent.
And then the impact.
And the catastrophic impact into the building, a massive fireball.
The reports on the impact itself are tough to read. Sources mentioned extreme heat.
Yeah, estimated at 1,500 degrees Celsius. Just incredible heat, which, as you can imagine, has made identifying victims incredibly difficult. And hitting the BJ Medical College hostel, the canteen, it meant students, staff on the ground were directly impacted, tragically adding to that awful death toll.
It really drives home that the devastation wasn't just the plane. It spilled right onto a populated area.
Yeah.
Moving from the mechanics, the sources also spent a lot of time in the human cost.
Yeah.
Just devastating. But amidst all that, there was one extraordinary story of survival mentioned.
The sole survivor, yes. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, a 40-year-old British citizen. The reports really highlight his survival as, well, a miracle. He was in seat 11A right next to an emergency exit.
How did he make it, according to his account?
Well, he reported that the section of the plane he was in somehow detached from the main wreckage when it hit. It landed sort of on the ground floor of the hostel, which let him escape the worst of the fire. He's being treated now at Ahmedabad Civil Hospital for multiple injuries. Just an incredible detail, really, given the circumstances.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And the sources, they detail the 241 onboard fatalities.
Yeah.
Did they break down the nationalities?
They did provide some breakdown. 169 Indian nationals, 53 British citizens, 7 Portuguese, and 1 Canadian. And just horribly, the passenger list included 11 children and 2 infants.
Oh, no. Any prominent victims mentioned?
Yes, a few names came up repeatedly. Vijay Rupani, who was the former chief minister of Gujarat. Also, Dr. Pratik Joshi, a radiologist based at Royal Derby Hospital in the UK. He was traveling with his wife and their 3 children.
The whole family?
Yes. The sources mentioned a detail about a photo, apparently a selfie they took just before boarding, that was widely shared afterwards. So sad.
Those personal stories just make the scale of it so real. And you mentioned the identification challenges due to the fire.
Yes, the extreme heat just complicated everything. Forensic experts, according to the reports, set up a makeshift DNA testing site right there at the BJ Medical College Examination Hall to process remains. As of June 16th, which was a few days after the crash, only 35 bodies had been formally identified.
So difficult for the families waiting. In that immediate aftermath, the response from authorities, the airline, that's crucial. What did the sources say about that?
The government reaction seemed pretty swift. Prime Minister Modi, Home Minister Amit Shah, the Civil Aviation Minister Ram Mohan Naidu, they all visited the site, visited hospitals, offered condolences, reviewed the rescue efforts, held high-level meetings, coordinating the response.
And support for the families. Was that set up quickly?
It appears so. Multiple helplines were established, both by the government and Air India, for assistance and information. And the Tata Group, which owns Air India now, made a significant pledge.
What was that?
1 crore rupees, that's about $120,000 in financial aid for each fatality, plus covering medical expenses for the injured and helping rebuild the hostel block that was destroyed.
Okay, so now the investigation, the absolutely crucial phase. How are they trying to figure out what caused this?
Right. India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AAIB, is leading the investigation. They're getting help from international bodies, the UK's AAIB, the US NTSB, and also from Boeing, the manufacturer. Standard procedure in these cases.
And the most vital evidence, always, are the black boxes.
Absolutely essential. You've got the flight data recorder, the FDR. That records, well, everything the plane systems are doing: altitude, speed, engine stats, flap settings, control inputs, hundreds of parameters. That was found relatively quickly, June 13th, on the rooftop near the crash site. Then there's the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR. Captures all the audio from the cockpit pilot conversations, alarms, engine sounds, everything happening in those final moments. That took a bit longer to find, recovered on June 16th. Analyzing the data from both of those, synchronized, that's how investigators piece together exactly what happened.
So based on those early reports, expert commentary in your sources,
Yeah.
what are the initial theories, the abnormalities they're looking at?
Well, there are multiple possibilities being examined. The sources touched on several key areas. The most immediate one, coming straight from that Mayday call, is engine thrust, power loss.
Right, no thrust.
Exactly. Pilots reported no thrust. Now, aviation experts like Dr. Jason Knight were cited noting a cloud of dust seen after takeoff, which could hint at an engine issue. But they also heavily stressed how incredibly rare it is for both engines on a modern jet like this to fail simultaneously, especially without some obvious external event. That's a very, very unlikely scenario usually.
Okay, then there's the visual evidence. Eyewitnesses, video. The landing gear was still down.
Yes, that was a key observation in several reports. A former British Airways pilot, Alistair Rosenshine, was quoted highlighting that leaving the gear down after takeoff, it's just not correct procedure.
Why? What's the impact?
It creates significant aerodynamic drag. Keeping it extended makes it much harder for the plane to accelerate and gain altitude, which is obviously critical right after takeoff.
And the sources also mentioned possible issues with the wing flaps.
Yeah. Another pilot, Steve Scheibner from American Airlines, was mentioned suggesting flap abnormalities. Flaps are crucial. They generate lift at lower speeds, like during takeoff. So one theory floated was maybe a procedural error in the cockpit?
Like what?
Like perhaps the co-pilot mistakenly pulled the lever to retract the flaps instead of the landing gear lever. They can sometimes be close together or feel similar. If the flaps were pulled up too early, that would severely cut the wing's lift. Could absolutely explain why the plane couldn't climb.
The 787 is known for being more electric, right? Did that factor into the theories?
It did. Yes, it's a more electric aircraft. Lots of systems use electricity instead of traditional hydraulics or pneumatics. So there was speculation mentioned in places like the Times of India from experts suggesting maybe an electrical system malfunction could have messed with the engine's response.
Oh, so?
Well, they mentioned components like variable frequency starter generators, VFSGs. They're key for managing power from the engines. If they failed, it could potentially lead to a loss of engine control through the digital systems. There was also mention that the possible deployment of the Ram air turbine, the RAT.
The emergency power turbine.
Exactly, that little propeller that pops out for backup power. If that deployed, it would strongly suggest a major electrical failure happened.
Okay. Were there other theories? Maybe about how the plane was prepared? Weight, perhaps?
Yes, some experts also raised the possibility of the aircraft being overloaded. Or maybe the pilots entered the wrong zero fuel weight, the plane's weight before fuel into the flight computer.
And that would affect takeoff calculations.
Right. Getting that number wrong means the calculated speeds and thrust settings for takeoff could be incorrect. Potentially not enough power commanded for the actual weight.
What about environmental things, like bird strikes? Ahmedabad Airport's reputation came up.
It did. The sources noted Ahmedabad is notorious for birds, and bird strikes are definitely a risk. They can damage engines, but the reports also suggested that causing both engines to fail almost simultaneously from birds is highly unlikely. Usually you'd expect to see, flames, sparks, something more obviously localized to an engine if it was a catastrophic bird ingestion. That wasn't widely reported here in the same way as the general power loss, so maybe a factor, but probably not the sole cause for what the pilots described.
And maintenance. Always looked at after a crash.
Definitely. Boeing's and Air India's maintenance records for this specific plane, VTA and B, are under intense scrutiny. It's a standard part of any investigation, but particularly relevant if other potential causes seem less likely initially.
This incident, it lands, unfortunately, right when Boeing has been under a lot of scrutiny already.
It absolutely does. The sources make that connection clear. While the 787 itself, as we said, has had a stellar safety record, over 1,000 delivered since 2009. This is the first fatal crash it happens against this backdrop of mounting concerns about Boeing's manufacturing quality, safety culture across its other lines.
Concerns that have been very public lately.
Exactly. The reports immediately bring up the two tragic 737 MAX crashes back in 2018-2019, the long grounding that followed, and then more recently that Alaska Airlines 737 MAX door plug incident, January 2025. That really amplified concerns and led to new regulatory checks on Boeing's production.
And we've heard from whistleblowers, too, haven't we?
Yes. The sources mentioned people like John Barnett, a former Boeing quality manager who'd specifically raised concerns about 787 production before his death earlier this year. And Sam Salahpour, another engineer, they've alleged, corners being cut, safety violations in manufacturing is broader context, but it hangs over any incident involving a Boeing plane right now.
Did Boeing issue a statement about AI-171?
They did. Expressed condolences, standard stuff, said they're ready to provide full technical support to the Indian investigation.
And regulators in India. They took action regarding Air India's other 787s.
Yes, pretty quickly. Indian regulators ordered Air India to conduct additional maintenance actions on its entire 787 fleet, sort of a precautionary measure after the crash. The FAA in the U.S. said, there wasn't immediate data for a global grounding, but they're watching closely and committed to any safety recommendations that come out of the investigation.
And then, just to compound the worry, the sources noted another incident with an Air India 787 just days later.
Yeah, that really increased the pressure. Just 4 days after Ahmedabad, on Monday, June 16th, another Air India 787-flight AI-315 had to turn back to Hong Kong shortly after takeoff.
Why?
Reason given was just a technical issue. Now, that flight landed safely, thankfully, but having a second incident, same aircraft type, same airline, so soon after a fatal crash. Well, it significantly heightened scrutiny on Air India's operations and the 787 fleet in general.
Yeah, you can imagine. This is clearly a really difficult situation for Air India itself.
It's described as a severe blow, especially because the airline is in the middle of this major revitalization effort under the Tata Group. Air India's CEO, Campbell Wilson, put out a statement: deep sorrow, commitment to helping families, full cooperation with the probe.
And the market reacted. Stock prices.
Yes, there was an impact. Some listed Tata Group companies like Tata Technologies, Trent, saw their shares dip maybe up to 2.6%. Boeing stock, BA, also dropped 4.8% on the day of the crash, another 1.7% the next day. Even though Boeing's shares had been up overall for the year, an event like this is a major PR crisis. It can definitely affect future orders, maybe push airlines towards competitors like Airbus.
So as we pull all this information together from your sources, it's clear this was just an incredibly complex, incredibly rapid disaster right after takeoff.
Absolutely. Investigators have got multiple potential paths to look down. You've got issues potentially hitting engine power directly, maybe the wing's lift surfaces. Could those be linked to electrical problems or maybe a procedural error? Or are there underlying factors? Maintenance, even manufacturing questions might come up. That black box data, the FDR and CVR, that's going to be absolutely paramount in figuring out what really happened in those last seconds.
And the whole aviation world, and especially the families, are just waiting for clear answers from this investigation. It has to be meticulous.
Yeah, and it's not just about finding one single cause. It's about understanding how all the systems interacted, what the pilots were dealing with, and crucially, what lessons can be learned to stop anything like this ever happening again.
It's such a stark reminder, isn't it, of the complexity of modern flight, even though it remains incredibly safe overall. And it just highlights how critical these investigations are.
It really does. And maybe this leaves you, the listener, with something to think about. Given how sophisticated planes like the 787 are, but also considering the recent spotlight on manufacturing quality, how do you think tragedies like this, combined with those broader concerns, might impact public confidence in flying, even on aircraft types that have had, until now, very strong safety records?
Having a life scholarship and being able to afford to go to college made me feel inspired to go.
When I got a life scholarship, it was such a relief.
I knew that I wanted to have an impact. Having a life scholarship through the SC Education Lottery was huge. It gave me the opportunity to make that impact right here at home.
The South Carolina Education Lottery. A better you, a better us, a better South Carolina. Visit sceducationlottery.com/betteryou.